just shy of 3 a.m. as I try to do this stream thing, even though this is probably some of the worst streaming conditions that I've ever had in terms of how I feel and how I sound. And so, there's a lot of things that have been piling up in the backlog that I've been wanting to talk about, and we shall talk about them. What is up, everybody? This is Jay, aka MultimediaJay, doing a Pandemi-Rant tonight. We are long past overdue to talk about how BA5 is gone. It is August 22nd, 2022. We're heading into late August, and there's, BA5 here in the Northeast hasn't gone the way that I thought it would, although it did make the rounds over at TwitchCon Amsterdam earlier this summer, and people are concerned about it at TwitchCon San Diego and stuff along those lines. But there's a whole, let's just say, that what's going on here at the Geek House is basically, well, I'm not going to be bored anytime soon. So we got the Pandemi-Rant about BA5 and what's coming up when the schools start back up in this area to talk about. I also have a chat stream that I'm overdue for about Twitch basically pulling a Darth Vader when it comes to the whole situation with their new monetization setup for Twitch streamers. So we have that going on. I also have a tech video, the next tech video to progress the story of the Great Geek House reshuffle of 2022 done, and just have to edit it together. And I also have two other videos I want to make about smaller topics of discussion. How many of these, pain relief roller things do I really need? This is ridiculous. Oh, man. I got to sort all these out. And if any of them are actually running out of stuff, get rid of the darn things. Yeah, getting old sucks. It's one of the things you can learn from this channel. But anyways, so I have multiple videos to work on, multiple things to stream about, and an order of operations to all of it. It's obvious at this point that the algorithms as well as the audience is the friendliest to the retro stuff that I've been doing, as well as the progression of what's going on around the Geek House. So because of that, I want a video related to that to be in the #1 parking spot on the channel. And then when it comes to the streams, I want stuff that is closer to technology in the #1 parking spot for the streams. But the streams give way to the videos, so to speak, in terms of the order of the way I do things and stuff along those lines. So tonight, especially with it being smack dab in the middle of heat wave ice cream season and the sugar basically making it so that I really should not be doing any streaming anytime soon. With all of this that's going on, what the heck? My Firefox froze. Why is going to live control? Why is opening up YouTube freezing my Firefox now? I can't even drag the window. It's literally stuck. Close it. Just open another one. I just hope we don't TSR. I just hope we don't get TSR. Ooh, I can't do anything with Firefox windows. Firefox windows are frozen as is. Fortunately, I don't... Well, we'll just kill Firefox then. I don't actually need live control room open to be streaming. What? Now I can't right-click. Where's my right-click? Right-click. Do we have... Let me just check something here. We are not in power saver mode, so that issue with Avast antivirus... What? Okay, we're going to Control-Alt-Delete this now. What happened? What do we got? We don't have any problems with this or any of that. Let me see here. OBS is using only 6% of the processor. Let me go to Firefox is completely gone. All right, right click. There's something CPU. What's sucking CPU on this thing? Nothing. Yeah, it was Firefox. They say, you know what it is? I have several Chrome. There we go. Now it's back to normal. I have several Chrome tabs open, and we know that Chrome nowadays operates like a Greyhound bus. So trying to get back to live control room, and it's taken a while to reload everything. See, there we go. Finally, yay. We can put that back there, set it to stream health, make sure that YouTube doesn't complain at me. And let's see here. Back to my channel content, if it'll let me load it with all the whatever resources Chrome's taking up here. So these Pandemi-Rants are a couple months apart, so to speak, but in terms of the order of operations, it's the sort of thing that should only pop up once every few months or so. And I keep saying that I don't know if I want to do another one of these things, and then things fundamentally change that makes me want to, do this again. So why don't we just pick up where we left off? Last go round, we were at the tail end of BA 212.1, which was the special homegrown New York variant, so to speak. And this time, now we have BA 5 as the main issue here. There's also BA4 being replaced slowly by BA4.6, and people were wondering if BA4.6 is in any way going to challenge BA5's current dominance. BA5 also is the variant that many have called the new Delta, and the numbers reflect that. It has definitely lived up to its reputation for basically being the new Delta. We live in an environment where the CDC continues to relax guidelines all over the place right in time for the schools to start back up, kind of like that other thing they did in 2021 when they relaxed mask requirements right before the Delta variant started making the rounds. So it's just a total mess. As I go through this discussion, though, I want you folks to keep in mind the whole enemy of my enemy thing. I don't know how many people have heard the term, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's fundamentally a problematic thing. It's a very problematic statement because it's not always true. Just because somebody is the enemy of your enemy does not always mean you're going to get along with them. But what makes this whole idea illogical is this idea that anything that you do should be based on what people you don't like are doing or not doing. That should sound very, very familiar for any of you people thinking about the whole COVID thing and how the pandemic has gone here in the United States. So I'm here tonight as usually the last person in the entire building who still wears a mask. So, and I understand it's sad really when people will say that what I'm saying sounds smart, but then they continue doing stupid stuff that leaves them prone to whatever this thing can still do to them. 2 rules I've been saying for the last 2 years with regards to COVID-19. Number 1, you don't know who has this thing. Number 2, you don't know what it's going to do to you if you get it. In 2020, this meant a couple of things, but now we have vaccines for every age group, and bivalent vaccines to target BA5 specifically are coming out within a couple of weeks. And I'll be sure to sign up for those when they become available, or if they go out based on eligibility first, whenever I get eligible. That's one of the reasons why I stayed current on the boosters and everything. Talk with the doctor as well about, other stuff related to that. So I have a dialogue going with my doctor on all of this stuff. But the same 2 rules are still in play. You don't know who has it because there's an incubation period, and people become contagious before they show signs that they even have this thing. Second, you don't know what it's going to do to you if you get it. And that's the issue here. You could be asymptomatic. You could have something resembling a cold. You could have something resembling the flu. You could end up dead. That's been one of the biggest wild cards of this thing the entire time. But as people continue to not stay vigilant and then governments start making excuses, one of the biggest things that has come up lately is this whole enemy of my enemy thing, which is why I'm here to talk about this today. I am sick and tired of the way people handle the pandemic being affected by what people they don't like are doing. There's 2 examples that should be really familiar to people. 1, the American right wing. Despite the fact that Operation Warp Speed was a Donald Trump thing at the end of the Trump administration, President Trump wound up getting vaccinated, and he actually cut the line to start getting vaccinated before leaving office. So, despite this blatantly being a bipartisan thing, the American right wing, Fox News, Tucker Carlson, the whole 9 yards, wants to turn actually fighting this thing, whether masks, social distancing, mandates, policies, etc., into a liberal thing. And because the liberals do it, the liberals are bad. So because the liberals do it, conservative so-called patriots can't. Never mind that if you actually pay attention to the way the world works right now, this thing, COVID, is one of the biggest threats to our way of life. In the less vaccinated parts of the world, this thing has shut down factories, thrown people out of work in transportation and logistics, disrupted supply chains, and been one of the biggest, if not the biggest, contributors to the inflation that everybody's complaining about right now. One of the classic definitions of inflation: too much money chasing too few goods. How do you get too few goods? You disrupt supply chains, like with a once-in-a-century pandemic virus. 20 years ago, in the early 2000s, when a bunch of terrorists were flying planes into buildings and threatening our way of life, as our Republican administration under George W. Bush said back then, we went and fought wars in Afghanistan and Iraq for years in responses. Americans did not take sitting down anything that threatened our way of life. And 20 years later, a microscopic pathogen has done what the terrorists who are targeting our country and Western civilization in general couldn't do. Gotten Americans to cave on going after anything that threatens our way of life. In the name of what? Going to a concert? Not having to wear a mask at Walmart? Having your kids go to school? If you live outside of towns where the majority of the citizens want to do the right thing? What have we gained here? It's ridiculous. So yeah, the American right wing has made an Olympic sport out of, we're not going to do this, that, or the other about the pandemic because those evil liberals do it. Wearing masks, liberal thing. Getting vaccinated, liberal thing. In most cases, there are some sane Republican governors in red states that have actually seen that, yes, one of the mRNA companies, Moderna, is based out of Massachusetts. So America has done something great with the kind of vaccines we brought to market versus other parts of the world like China. Some, very few, people in the Republican Party have seen that actually fighting the virus is the patriotic thing to do. So, but there are so many people that are just so easily brainwashed. They don't think for themselves. They go by what the talking heads on TV tell them. And they let someone else tell them that getting vaccinated, wearing a mask, social distancing, anything to fight this thing was not your patriotic duty. It was just some government overreach thing that the liberals do. And I'm highly familiar with right-wing media. I spent years believing in fiscal conservatism. Registered Republican. I was familiar with townhall.com, read books by Ann Coulter and Larry Elder and Ronald Radash. Listened to Rush Limbaugh. Very, very familiar with where conservatism has gone in the last 20 years. And the answer is nowhere good. Very, very familiar with the contrarianism that exists on conservative talk radio, which people are inherently very ill-informed. They don't realize that there's an entire group of talk radio hosts out there that are going to make you mad so that you'll listen to their show and yell at the radio or call in and argue with them. Do you think the internet is the only place where this happens? Why do you think there are far-right as well as libertarian radio hosts in the liberal Northeast here in New England? Why do you think there's hard-right radio personalities on radio stations in Massachusetts, of all places? Controversy makes money from time to time. But you have these people out there that let other people tell them that stuff that could harm or kill them is the conservative thing to do. We end up in the situation that we're in today. Up until 2022, this was really how things panned out. The liberals wanted to fight the virus, the conservatives didn't. But now, sadly, here in the middle of 2022, the government is turning into a third faction in this whole argument about science versus anti-science, or emotions versus intelligence and stuff along those lines. The government is turning into a third party in this dispute because now there's a new enemy of my enemy thing on the international scene. China wants to remain aggressive against COVID. So, does it automatically make us like China if the West wants to continue actually fighting the virus? And knowing what this thing can do to individuals, knowing what this thing can do to the private sector, knowing what this thing can do to the economy, I think it is definitely worth it to remain aggressive towards this thing because it's a threat to our way of life. And if not at a macro level, definitely at a micro level. You want to go on living, right? I assume most of you watching this, you want to live a long, healthy life. Well, now we have the studies coming out on the data coming out on the intermediate effects of infection and reinfection and mass infection. And we find out, oh yeah, so on an acute level, the virus goes after parts of your brain that affect the ability to taste food and smell and stuff like that. And then people lose their senses of smell and taste, sometimes for a very long time. Sometimes that's a form of long COVID. But, a virus that goes after stuff in your brain. Suddenly now we're finding links to dementia, development of Alzheimer's, brain fog, aging your brain 10 years from even a mild infection, stuff along those lines. We're finding all these bad things out. This is the thing. This is the thing that let's get one thing straight here. So there's two things in play when it comes to enemy of my enemy, and not basing the way you handle the pandemic on stuff that people you don't like are doing. We have the American right wing being aggressive towards the virus into a left wing thing when it doesn't need to be that way. We also have Western politicians remaining aggressive towards the virus and trying to find ways to beat it into something that China does, and you may not want to be 100% like China. In both cases, the same thing is in play. Some adversary, rival, or someone we don't like or agree with is doing something, so therefore we don't do it. You don't want to do that. Over 1 million dead Americans, if they could talk, could testify, yeah, we don't want to do this. It's kind of sad, things are in the state that they're in, coming up on Labor Day. Kind of sad, which Labor Day, of course, has been pretty much ruined by what happened to my cousin last year. My cousin, by the way, lost his life because of crap like this. Scotsman Josh, my cousin, was in the hospital a year ago, fighting for his life, hooked up to machines, wound up on a ventilator during the Delta surge in Florida. He passed away right around Labor Day, 41 years old. Do you want to call that old? What ruined everything for him, and I was looking over his social media posts from when he first got infected, just to make sure that his widow didn't go in and scrub his Facebook. He was very bummed out when he was infected without getting vaccinated. People were saying, goodness, no COVID shots? And he was like, don't you think that if I had gotten them, I wouldn't be in the position I'm in right now? That is guilt right there, that he knew he screwed up. What was the circumstances for my cousin, though, before he passed? He was married to someone who was hard right, loved Trump, rabid anti-vaxxer, emotionally unstable, and even after losing her husband to Delta and having to open a GoFundMe for the medical bills from it, I found out later on she still wouldn't get vaccinated. She still wouldn't get vaccinated. Now, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. But if you're married to somebody who you say is the love of your life and you lose them at a young age to something like this, wouldn't you want to do something differently after losing the love of your life? What's the... We know what the issue is here, though. The issue is exactly what I'm talking about. The enemy of my enemy, etc. Those other people do this, so I'm not going to. And so you had this culture ripping around Florida back then and ripping around Florida now. Florida continues to have some of the worst community, even on the so-called green map that folks like myself were criticizing when the CDC rolled it out earlier this year after Omicron. Florida is still in crap condition versus much of the rest of the country, if not all of it. So nothing has changed in a year. No. What killed my cousin was this crap. A culture where he'd get harassed if he went to get vaccinated, or even divorced if he went to get vaccinated. It was in the culture, local politics, state politics, and also among the right wing in America, federal politics. But this idea that the other people are doing this, so therefore we don't. The other people have their thing, and then they're going nuts about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and whatever. It's at the core of all of this. At the core of all of this behavior is the same thing. Those other people do this, so therefore you shouldn't. And you know what? This enemy of my enemy crap is not a thing elsewhere. You don't see this behavior and this activity in the private sector, in American enterprise. You don't see this crap in corporate America. You see espionage. If one of your rivals, enemies, etc., comes up with a good idea, you see espionage. You see companies sending moles into other companies to try and steal trade secrets, or you see governments sending spies into other countries. They have a good idea. They have a good idea. Let's send one of our intelligence agents to try and steal the idea. Elsewhere, other than this lunacy, not too strong of a word, by the way. Elsewhere, other than this lunacy, you will find situations where people, organizations, governments, whatever, if a rival, antagonist, enemy, etc., has a good idea, they don't ignore it just because the other people have it. They try to get it for themselves. The run-up to the Cold War is another good example of this. The United States drops the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. The Soviets don't ignore nuclear technology because the Americans got it first. They eventually end up with nukes of their own, and we have the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, all that stuff that informed U.S. foreign policy in the latter half of the 20th century. So, yet another example where when your adversaries, rivals, people you don't like, whatever, have a good idea, you don't leave them to it. So you see how insane this is. This is completely nuts. That for the once-in-a-century pandemic, suddenly we have to get so tribal that, you have a culture that hates vaccines, hates masks, hates distancing, this antagonism, this hatred, this nonsense for this situation when there's a highly contagious respiratory virus making the rounds all around the world, killing millions of people. This is when people decide to stick their nose in the air like petulant children and be like, how many times am I going to have to make that kind of a reference? Seriously. This is the time when this crap happens. Of all the times. It's insane. But that's something to think about, especially as the CDC continues to loosen up guidelines. But that's another situation. That's another story altogether. Look, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The midterms are coming up. The Joe Biden administration and the Democrats ran on a campaign of advancing us from the pandemic mess we were in 2 years ago. And they're going to get that by hook or by crook. The sad part is, why do these administration folks think that conservatives are just going to let them off the hook, and they're not going to call them out for moving goalposts or whatever, or pretending we've made progress or whatever. It's not going to work that way, I'll tell you that much. I can tell you that when the CDC rolled out what we now know as the green map with the COVID community levels, right-wing commentators were already spitting fire at the Biden administration for changing the definitions of things. So, and then there's going after President Biden for changing the definition of pandemic, changing definitions of vaccines, etc. All these things that people are screaming in the right-wing blogosphere. So, no, there is no playing nice here. There will be mudslinging. There will be attempts to see the worst in literally everything that President Biden and the administration has tried to do for the last 2 years. There will be attempts to deflect, downplay, deadpan even the progress we have managed to make in the past 2 years, simply because the other guys have been in charge. So with that in mind, and the political crap that's going on right now as we start looking at the upcoming election in November, we probably shouldn't be surprised that the nonsense that's going on is going on. But enough rhetoric. Let's look at the reality of things. And let's begin with the numbers over on COVID Act Now. So that's the situation that we're in. There's way too much of this enemy of my enemy nonsense that is causing problems for the way we handle the pandemic. Whether it's a partisan, whether it's politicizing the virus, politicizing the vaccine, kicking against the bricks on things, politicizing certain treatments of COVID and stuff along those lines, turning what should be medicine and science into a political slap fight. And for what? With 1 million plus Americans dead. What are we having this stupid little fight for? So you have that going on, and you also have this whole idea of not wanting to look like China messing with things. So, but yet, the scientists have still done their thing. The articles have still been published showing that BA.5 could be more severe and land more people in the hospital. Took some characteristics from Delta because it's a recombinant variant. And I have to dig for them more nowadays because a lot of data sources have gone to weekly updates and stuff like that. I have to dig for them nowadays. But I still find articles about how it's the unvaccinated that are ending up in the hospital. People that are just winging it with infection immunity, which, under BA.5 can drop down to 28 days now. It's not really a 90-day thing anymore. Just the new variants and their ability to reinfect and stuff like that. It's just, the thing is, though, this kind of reminds me of the Roman Empire. You went from the high-level emperors to the emperors you never heard of. BA.5 is the last major variant that I've heard anyone sounding the alarm on. Centaurus and BA.4/6, I don't know. Well, we'll just have to wait and see on that one. BA.5 is the big one. BA.5 is the one that is the reason why I'm still masking and the whole 9 yards. All right, let's take a look at these charts here. Go back to light mode for COVID Act Now. But BA.5 was supposed to share some things in common with Delta, and this looks familiar. Link up to Google Chrome. Let's take a look at this. Here is so CDC revised things when it came up with community levels, etc. Well, the green map is no longer green. The green map on COVID Act Now is not very green anymore. And where are the problems? Florida. Vaccination progress, I don't look at too much anymore because it's just been too long. Worst cases per 100,000 residents, Puerto Rico has something going on. They had something going on in Delta too. Kentucky, West Virginia, Alaska, Mississippi, etc. But the big thing I'm looking at, though, lately is the hospitalizations, because since we know that COVID has been politicized to death, there's an entire group of people out there, depending on how many right-wingers are in your neck of the woods, you're going to have some percentage of your population. You're going to have some percentage of your population that will do anything they can to deny they have COVID, even if they catch it. So I've already seen it from my anti-vaxxer step relatives, some of whom are on like their second or third infections. They've had like multiple variants so far. They're the kinds of people that the scientific studies are worried about in terms of the cumulative effects of getting infected multiple times. So depending on how many of these people there are in your neighborhood, you're going to have people who will do everything they can to get away with essentially muscling through life, even if they get infected. And people think I'm paranoid for this, but I still believe that in this kind of climate, especially with the inflation and the other stuff going on, it is more than possible that there will be people trying to work sick if they're asymptomatic or they have mild symptoms. They'll chalk it up to something else. They'll chalk it up to something else and try and suppress the symptoms with OTC medication. And then you got to worry about catching it from them. There was an incident in the Los Angeles area with the schools that is very similar to this, and I highly doubt it's going to be anything unique. So the cases are only what is actually reported. There is more than enough at-home testing nowadays that there could be way more going on than the officially reported cases. That's why I've been looking mostly at hospitalizations and the positivity rate for PCR testing. You can pretend you don't have COVID when you get it all you want, if your symptoms are mild enough. You get your ass shipped off to the hospital, they're going to test you. You get carted off to the hospital, you're getting tested. You're getting treated. So, in a sense, that's one of the big things I'm looking at with BA5 is that we knew BA5 would jump up the hospitalizations because of the recombinant issues that it has being a recombinant of Delta and Omicron. So, therefore, because of this, I'm keeping an eye on mostly hospitalizations and the positivity rate. When people are forced to be honest because their ass got hauled off to the hospital or they had to take a PCR test for whatever reason, that'll give us the best numbers. Cases, as far as I'm concerned, are probably being grotesquely underreported. Fortunately, the green map, as it were, takes hospitalizations into account. And that's and hospitalizations do tell me quite the story here. So let's forget the cases per 100K and go straight over to admissions per 100K. And what are we finding here? First, the DC area constantly having problems, given all these government people I keep hearing coming down with BA5. Having mild symptoms, of course, isolating for 5 days, etc. So what, Dr. Fauci got it, President Biden got it, Kamala Harris got it. But you're talking about a lot of mingling and a lot of stuff being done with people talking to each other, debating each other, etc. And then it's in an environment where, because everything's been politicized to death, one side of the House of Representatives or whatever wouldn't wear masks while the other ones still did. So since we're turning literally everything related to this crap into some kind of political issue that is affected by the midterms, I am not surprised that the DC area is topping everything in terms of admissions per 100,000 residents. Don't forget also, while you have all of these minimizer policies going around, and by the way, I might as well say pro-virus at this point. You have anti-vaxxers, you have anti-maskers, and you have COVID minimizers, among other groups of people that are not doing the right thing right now. We might as well just put them all under one lump umbrella, whatever you want to call it, and say they're pro-virus people. With all these people in Washington desperate by any means necessary to look like we've made progress on the pandemic, how many of these hospitalizations are rank and file workers of places that government people are either involved with, like the White House staff, or they visit, like restaurants in the area or something? How much of this is being impacted by the current culture in Washington and how it affects the rank and file workers of the various businesses in the area? Then you have West Virginia. West Virginia has had problems with vaccine adoption, still at 66%. 66% there. Is that at least one? I don't look at the vaccination numbers anymore because It's all that really matters with that anymore is whether or not you are up to date on your shots. Have you gotten your doses? Have you gotten the boosters, etc.? Do you get the bivalent vaccine when it becomes available? That our regulators, by the way, 2 thumbs up to them. They required it to target BA.5 instead of just Omicron like in the EU. So UK got theirs first because the EU regulations are a little less strict than ours, but our people specifically requested and demanded that the vaccines target BA.5. Big thumbs up for that. Don't forget the current vaccines available, as good as they've done, targeted the ancestral strain from 2 years ago. It's only by, I'd say, luck at this point and pretty darn good doing well on what we did here in the West that our vaccines are still in any way effective against all these variants later. So the numbers are supporting that, though, that it is still better to get vaccinated and boosted. West Virginia. Then you have Florida, Alabama, Kentucky, Louisiana, Georgia, Montana. Flip it the other way. Vermont, Nevada, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, Puerto Rico, Rhode Island, Utah. Is Connecticut in here somewhere? Where's Connecticut at? Massachusetts is at number 16 for the lowest COVID admissions per 100,000 residents. Where's Connecticut? 11.9. Okay, 28. Of course, we have more of a mix. We have more of a mix here. So, in terms of who believes what, so it's just stupid. It's just so if you think that ideas, beliefs, dogmas, doctrines, etc. don't matter, you probably learned that they do the hard way if you got infected in this mess. Either way. So the big thing I'm looking at here, the infection rate, I would still say matters. The big thing, though, is the hospitalizations. When people are forced to be honest, forced to report that something went wrong, what does that look like? And so we have here with what used to be the green map. Look at where all the activity is. More built up areas and red states. You know, unless it's red states out in the middle of nowhere. But even still, more built up areas, more conservative areas. So boy, here we go again. And look at Florida. 20.1, one of the highest admissions per 100,000 residents in the state. I wonder how strained the hospital system is, because one of the things that community levels was supposed to do, community levels was supposed to light up when the hospitals were being threatened. So anywhere that's orange, there should be a problem with the local hospitals, or, you know, it might cause problems for care because too many people are getting hospitalized or the cases are too high. Reported cases anyways. Let's go to Connecticut. What's interesting, though, is you find, let's go back to the national, let's go to the national maps. Get off Connecticut, go back to the national maps. Not as much in the Northeast. So the interesting thing here is this wasn't the case a couple of months ago with BA.2.12.1. I'm wondering if BA.2.12.1 is close enough to BA.5 that the prior wave of BA.2.12.1 did all what was going to happen, and BA.5 is just the tail end of that. So let's go to Connecticut. Connecticut was mostly the western and southern half of the state was lit up. Now more of the state has lit up. Why? Admissions per 100,000 residents, hospitalizations. So we talked about earlier about BA.5 essentially being the new Delta. Recombinant variant could potentially be more severe. And so with the case numbers, and remember, these are only reported cases, there's now very easy to access home testing where people can test, find out they have COVID and be like, oh crap, and take some aspirin or something. It's just, as much as home testing, as much as antigen testing has been great, it has unfortunately had some downsides, and this is one of them, that all the people out there who want to pretend they don't have, they either won't test or they'll test positive and try to hide it. That they just fundamentally hate everything about all of this. They blame the liberals for everything or whatever. That kind of thing. So, with the vaccines in Connecticut doing as well as they did, when Delta made it up to the Northeast, we basically had a murmur. We didn't have a giant surge like in Florida, where my cousin unfortunately passed away. But you look at what happened since the spike here from BA.2.12.1. Our baseline is now what the Delta variant was doing in Connecticut. So fundamentally, you want to talk about, do masks still work despite the more transmissible variants? Do masks still work? Does social distancing still work? Does all the other mitigation measures besides vaccines still work? Yes, they do. Here's summer of 2020 pre-vaccine, summer of 2021. The Delta variant arrives, we get a murmur instead of a big surge. Everybody has problems with Omicron because of its high transmissibility. Then we have BA2 and BA.2.12.1 representing this spike right here. But that means that this summer in 2022 has been our worst ever. What do you know? Least mitigations equals most activity during what's normally the quietest part of the year. So now we take a look at what happens when the kids go back to school. But this is not what I'm looking at here. Since we know there's a lot of people out there that are going to hate everything about fighting the virus and pretend they don't have COVID until they are forced to admit they have it. Let's look at the hospitalizations. And here is the number that I've been focusing on the most. This is one of the biggest reasons why I'm still wearing masks and why I'm still staying away from people. No matter how many mitigations get rolled back, I'm still going to be the big introvert that I am, and I have plenty of reasons to do so. 11.9. The hospitalizations per 100,000 residents is on par with where it was during the Delta murmur, and it is consistently being higher than Delta. This is where BA5 is worse than Delta. You have people with old shots, you have people who are immunocompromised, and you have mitigations being pulled back and being heavily, heavily criticized with the upcoming midterms. You have people in the media going nuts about this. Twitter is basically a giant Twitter storm. But get past all the screaming and shouting and look at the hard numbers. Hospitalizations per 100,000 residents. Here is, starts in late 2020, so we don't see much of the ancestral strain. UK Alpha, last hurrah there, crash. Delta variant, Omicron variant, this bump, I'll say bulge, but this bump right here, BA.2.12.1 in May, BA2 and 2.12.1, which 2.12.1 originated out of New York. So BA.2.12.1 and now BA.4.5 consistently kept us up there. The positivity rate, when people are forced to test, how many of the tests come back positive for PCRs? Here's the original strain, the worst. Here's the original strain until we locked everything down and crashed all of that. Here's UK Alpha. Vaccines rolled out, cutting off UK Alpha. Here's the Delta variant. Little murmur here up to 5%. Omicron up to 30% again, crashes afterwards. BA2 and 2.12.1, 15%. The bottom line has been double-digit positivity rates before COVID Act Now switched over to something based on COVID community levels for all their maps. A double-digit positivity rate used to mean that there was a risk that stuff was evading detection. We were double-digit during BA.2.12.1 here in Connecticut, and have been double-digit throughout BA.4.5. Bit of a drop here, but we'll see if it stays there, if it just dropped a bit because of some data, and it jumps back up. Many of the counties that lit up in the last week or two are lighting up the most for hospital admissions. There's the vaccination data for booster shots and booster adoption, etc. Now let's compare this to Florida. Let's back out a bit and go down to Florida, where my cousin lost his life last year, where Ron DeSantis is doing all kinds of things to try and get reelected. He even made the news lately saying that Florida was the state where woke goes to die. Yeah, well, there might be other things, other folks dying in Florida at the rate we're going with this crap. That they're going, I should say. Here's what my surviving cousins down there have to put up with. The original strain took longer to get down to the southern states. New York was one of the early centers of the original strain, as we remember. This is the original strain here. Here's UK Alpha. And here's the issue here is that Florida has bigger, if you look at the axes as to what's what, 200 is the baseline for when things light up in terms of weekly cases per 100K. Original strain, UK Alpha, Delta is worse than UK Alpha. We did not have that in Connecticut. Omicron, biggest spike. And then here is BA everything, essentially. 212.1 made its way down there. Then 4 and 5 took over. So you eventually have this giant wave of sorts that lasts a long time. Not quite as big of a spike as Delta previously, or Omicron, or UK Alpha. But hey, you know, when you see Florida become one of the worst states in the country for deaths, for deaths from COVID, it kind of doesn't, you know, let's see here. You see this kind of crap going on. Does that kind of make you want to get vaccinated if you're not totally in the we hate vaccines camp? So Florida's doing better than it was when my cousin was hospitalized, unfortunately. Still, primary adoption is down around Miami or so, in more built-up areas. But it just says it all right there, just the differences between Florida and what we have. That's what happens when you have different state leadership, different politics, different local leadership, different everything. Let's check Massachusetts. Massachusetts' story. Cases per 100K. This is the original strain, UK Alpha. They have a murmur for Delta as well. Spike for Omicron, spike for BA.2.12.1, and a murmur for the BA.4.5 era. Well, technically now it's BA.5. New York, where BA.2.12.1 originated from. Original strain, crash. January 2021. UK Alpha, similar story to Connecticut. Everything is super low by summer. Murmur for Delta. Remember, this is over 200? This was a big spike in Florida's numbers. Omicron, crash after Omicron. BA.2.12.1 originates in New York and spreads elsewhere in the Northeast. And now we have BA.4.5 is leveling out similar to in other Northeastern states. BA.5, the BA.5 era is on par with what Delta did. Rhode Island. This is 2020, right? Original strain, Alpha, dead by summer with the vaccine making the rounds. Murmur for the Delta variant, spike for Omicron, another spike for BA.2.12.1, murmur around Delta levels for BA.4.5. They've had similar issues with positivity being higher, but outside of Providence and Newport, Rhode Island has a lot of woods. So Rhode Island has a different story than us. They also have different leadership and different ways of doing things. But hospitalizations per 100,000 residents are on par with, they had a bit of a spike during BA.2.12.1 and otherwise in Delta variant territory. So the story is what it is. As long as BA.5 remains dominant and doing essentially what Delta did, in some cases a little worse, like Connecticut hospitalizations, I still have reasons to be cautious. I mean, other than the politics changing and things changing at the CDC and all this other crap that's been going on, if I was wearing a mask and staying away from people during this Delta murmur before Omicron showed up, why wouldn't I be doing the same now? The numbers clearly tell me that I should proceed as though the Delta variant was going around again. Because the numbers are when people are forced to do the right thing and actually admit they're sick, we find out that BA.5 has lived up to the hype of being the new Delta. This is what it looks like when you actually do the right thing with this stuff. This is what it looks like when you listen to science and in today's world instead of politicians and con artists, essentially. This is what happens when you listen to science instead of charlatans and politicians. Your call on how close they are to each other. Let's take a look at some of the other tabs that I have open. The variants In the United States, dominated by BA5, just shy of 90%. Is this what was crashing my browser earlier? This was freezing everything up? This data thing refreshing, even though it's only updated weekly? Come on, CDC. BA5, pretty much everywhere. Dominant variant nationwide, also the dominant variant in other parts of the world. I should probably load up the New York Times map as well while we're at it. New York Times COVID map. COVID in the U.S. Let's look at the world map too while we're at it. Let's see. Want to subscribe to the New York Times? I guess you could do worse. Here's the New York Times COVID hotspot map worldwide. Red, 29 per 100,000 residents versus whatever's going on over in Japan, Australia. Europe still has some problems too. Interesting that it's boiled over to Germany and Austria. Turkey as well. Interesting. Chile has some problems. Well, what is it with all... Maybe it's a tourism thing. I don't know. Why does Ukraine have numbers? That's cool considering the war going on there and everything. So there's the world map for this. Let's go back to look at the variants. BA5 obviously going all over the place, but BA4-6, the dark blue in this case. You just got to see, my prediction is that BA4-6 displaces BA4 because it's obviously an improvement over it, but it doesn't displace BA5, becomes a rival to it. I don't know if Centaurus will displace anything yet. That's BA275, which isn't even registering on here yet. It's not significant enough for it to even show up in the numbers yet. Let's look at Region 1, New England. Region 1, New England, similar, except BA5 actually is 90% of cases. BA4-6 is displacing BA4. The Midwest. What region is the Midwest? Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska. Region 7, that's where BA4-6 is making the most inroads at 15% of cases. Looks like it's stopped the progression of BA5. Maybe we'll have some kind of showdown between these two. So far, I've only heard that BA5 has the severity factor to it. Let's see. New England. But New England is not in that position. So this is where it gets interesting because New England had a lot of BA2.12.1 being right next to New York. So is that kind of holding things up a bit? You got to remember too, this is genomic surveillance percentage of samples. If the total cases drops, the percentages might not. So that's where the numbers are at. But the last thing we want to talk about is a little something going on in Newton, Massachusetts. The city of about 88, just shy of 89,000 people, according to the 2020 census here. Newton, Massachusetts just happens to be where Dr. Walensky at the CDC and Dr. Jha, who is the president's new COVID czar, so to speak, their kids go to the schools there. Newton, Massachusetts, very, very affluent. Should not be taken as a standard of every town's going to get like this. The Newton, Massachusetts school system spent $5 million upgrading the ventilation to make their schools safer for COVID in the COVID era. They're being lifted up as some kind of gold standard. So I decided, let's look at part of the thing you got to watch out for with what the government says about COVID versus what science says about COVID, which is unfortunately becoming a thing now. One of the things you have to watch out for is rich politicians getting biased by the bubbles they live in because they have money. There's a little something in business called the crowding out effect. If government gets too good at what it does, it destroys the private sector. So if you can make more money working for the government than working in private enterprise, guess what happens? Countries suddenly balloon their federal payrolls and whatnot. Everybody wants to work for the government. Everybody wants to work for the government now. So there really isn't the kind of entrepreneurial drive to try and do better in the private sector because everybody's first choice is to work for the government. So you have to watch out for well-off politicians forgetting what kind of bubbles and privilege they live in. Newton, Massachusetts. If the Newton school system spent $5 million upgrading the ventilation in their schools. So I decided to be realistic and do Wall Street versus Main Street. You remember that old thing? That old campaign thing from the 2000s? I decided to look at the way things are for the rest of us. So I went and I looked up what the school budget was for my hick town out here. Keep in mind, I'm in one of the more built-up towns. Well, our definition of built up, as in the town actually is a town. So there's a lot of places around here that have less people and less money than we do. Our school budget, which had to be voted on as to whether we even wanted to do this, $20 million grand total for the entire school year. $20 million. Newton, Massachusetts, way bigger area, way richer area, spent $5 million upgrading the ventilation in their schools and are being lifted up as a gold standard, as if school districts in less affluent areas can afford that. $5 million just for ventilation versus $20 million total budget in my town, and my town's more built up than a lot of what's around here. You get some town with only a $10 million school budget out here in the woods. You're talking about, well, I'll let the numbers speak for themselves. Let's go. I mean, if you want to talk about how affluent these people are, with nearly 90,000 people in this little rich suburb of Boston, they have their own COVID dashboard just for the city of Newton. This is the stomping grounds of Dr. Walensky at the CDC and Dr. Jha, the COVID czar. Here is what it's like when you're in a well-to-do town. Also, remember we talked about how the old weakest link thing, the way your experience with COVID in your area is very heavily based on local politics and what people believe and how that affects their actions. So I realize among conservative talk radio, having listened to it for a long time, and conservative thinkers, having read a lot of conservative columns in my day, there's this idea that liberals are too rich to be in touch with the average person. And that's why you see conservative populism like what happened with Donald Trump. There's this idea of the so-called liberal intelligentsia, where highly educated, rich liberals want to dictate how the entire rest of the country lives and are completely out of touch with what the average Joe in small town America has to deal with day to day. I can't imagine the city of Newton and having its own COVID dashboard is probably touted in some right-wing circle somewhere as those out-of-touch liberals who want to bankrupt us with their tax and spend policies. Okay, let's look at this dashboard just for the city of Newton, Massachusetts, a city of just shy of 90,000 people. They have cases, deaths, positivity rate, 6.27%, way lower than the Connecticut state average, I should mention. And 94% vaccinated. That's just shy of the 95% cap. The entire state of Massachusetts is at that. Connecticut, almost at that. But then you get to the stuff related to the school systems. Here's the dashboard from the end of the school year for Newton Public Schools. Now remember, one of the things that anti-vax nonsense pushers over here, even in the woods of Connecticut, have been pushing, trying to fight as long as they can, even when they lose. They have lost when it comes to adoption of the vaccines. Most of the country has had at least one dose by now. In Connecticut, if you're completely unvaccinated, you are fringe, because the wild majority of the state population has at least one dose now. So they lost on that. So then they went after the boosters, trying to keep people from getting booster shots. There are some people who got their ass kicked by BA2 and BA2.12.1 who were out for a week or two with the 9-to-5ers, because they got suckered into not getting a booster. That was the first booster shot. They might have even gotten what the federal government calls fully vaccinated, which is still 2 doses. But, a year later, 6, 7, 8, 9 months later, Omicron goes around, BA2 goes around, BA2.12.1 goes around. They're out for weeks. And I should probably mention, before we continue with this rich suburb of Boston here and their numbers, I should probably also mention something incredibly important. Something that people are not talking about, even in the arguments on Facebook. Almost nobody on social media wants to talk about the money side of COVID and how incredibly important it is to keep that in mind. Right now in the United States, the standard isolation period, if you test positive, is 5 days. That's a paycheck. It might not be in the same pay period, but you miss, under the right circumstances, that's a paycheck. How many paychecks are you willing to lose because you got COVID? How many would you like to just give up? Especially when, due to the Great Resignation, many industrial park jobs in my neck of the woods are hiring around the $20 an hour mark. If you don't make close to $20 an hour around here, you work for a crappy company. That's just the way it is. So you get hired for $18, $19, $20 an hour around here. Yeah, Connecticut has a high cost of living. That eats into it. But you get hired for $18, $19, $20 an hour around here. How many weeks of pay would you like to lose because you got COVID? Especially when today's variants can reinfect you every 28 days. How much money are you willing to blow? The state of Connecticut fortunately has a COVID relief fund for people who test positive, but how well is it funded? Especially with Connecticut Republicans wanting to push that COVID is over, blah, blah, blah. And Republicans in general not wanting to fund what we even do have, to the point where Dr. Jha is talking about how the U.S. is going to fall behind when the new boosters come out because we're having to dig money out of other stuff in order to have any chance of anyone getting the next round of shots. Because Republicans and their usual roadblock garbage, hating the pandemic and literally any way of fighting the virus they've come up with along the way, almost all of them anyways, they wanted to, they want to just pull the strings on funding to keep options available for U.S. citizens. It's crazy. So here in the state of Connecticut, imagine a state of Connecticut version of that. So here in the state of Connecticut, you test positive, you're kicked out of work for a week. There goes a paycheck. Do you really want to be chasing the government for some kind of something that is dependent upon how well the program is funded? I mean, Connecticut just announced hazard pay, essentially, up to $1,000 for essential workers who had to work during the pandemic. But that's dependent upon how many apply for it and how much funding it gets. If it gets bad enough, this could be like those class action lawsuits where, like, attach your name to the lawsuit and we'll send you money. And they get like $3 or something. Because so many people attach themselves to the lawsuit, the settlement of millions of dollars gets divvied up after lawyer fees. And the people actually affected in the class get peanuts. So people don't want to talk about the money side of COVID. They don't want to talk about losing paychecks because you have to stay home from work. They don't want to talk about, incurring medical debt because you wound up hospitalized instead of getting your shots. For some reason, it is very, very taboo to talk about the money side of COVID. Yes, you can get vaccinated, you can get boosted, you can, get the treatments and whatnot. You cannot get killed by this thing. But how much money would you like to throw away because of it? And knowing what kind of dollar amounts are attached to lost wages or getting hospitalized or anything along, or any kind of something or another because your life gets disrupted. How about childcare? Because your kid gets kicked out of school because they test positive. Now you have to worry about you, your spouse, other people in the family getting infected, So many ways that you can incur loss financially because of this thing. But people don't want to talk about that. They want to turn it into a giant political fight. It's crazy. So how much money do you want to lose? Do you want to be... And here's the thing. You chase the government, especially when people are signing up for hazard pay in Connecticut now with this new program. You can chase the government, but you got all these people out there who don't believe in, I don't want to live off the public dole or whatever. I don't want to live off the public dime. I don't want to chase the government. So how much money are you willing to lose because of this crap? Is it really worth not masking? Is it really worth not, choosing your friends wisely, not having certain people over your house, getting some people out of your life who don't want to do the right thing? Yeah, it's just, is it really worth it? I don't think so. Let's go back now. Let's get away from my neck of the woods. Let's go back to Newton, Massachusetts here. Newton, Massachusetts, where Dr. Walensky and Dr. Jha have kids enrolled in the school system that blew $5 million on ventilation upgrades. High amounts of vaccination among the general population. 94% vaccinated just in Newton. Here's the kid stuff. 82% elementary school age kids vaccinated through 6-1. Middle school, 89% vaccination. High school vaccination, 92%. 92%. Now you compare this to the numbers in your town or state. Obviously, we're from different planets. In my neck of the woods, like I said earlier, it has literally been the anti-vaxxers continuing to try and fight, as crazy as it makes them look, after they lose. They lost on stopping the vaccine from rolling out in Connecticut. They lost versus booster shots, so they went after boosters until they lost that. Then they went after getting kids vaccinated until they lost that. Now, the vaccines for people under 5. Anywhere they could gain a foothold, anything they could desperately grab onto, that's what they've gone for. But not here in Newton. We're not even talking about monkeypox yet. You're contagious for a month. That could potentially knock you out of work for a month. How much money are you willing to lose in the name of your attitude, your ego, or your politics? So, yeah. Something to keep an eye out for, especially with some of these hoity-toity Washington types. They come from areas where things are very different than most of the rest of us. And then you have this antagonism towards enacting policy that is too far away from what people are already doing. That, from what I understand, is one of the things driving a lot of the loosening of mitigations and stuff from the CDC recently. Well, if we make something that's too different from what people are doing, they're not going to do it. I guess we should be glad that this mentality doesn't exist with us passing laws. It is not the job of the CDC or any medical public health professional to just make wishy-washy guidance that goes along with what idiots are already doing. Stop doing things based on the lowest common denominator. If it is objectively better to get vaccinated, you set things based on that. If it is objectively better to mask, like we've seen the numbers for Connecticut, masking made a difference, even with some newer variants in 2021 versus 2022, with our worst summer ever. It should be based on the science and what the hard science says. not what's popular. Americans should be very familiar with an environment. Americans should be extremely familiar with an environment where what's right is not popular and what's popular is not right. America was once one of those ideas. A constitutional republic, a democracy in an era of monarchies everywhere. Once upon a time, the United States of America was a new idea. It wasn't popular yet. Now, countries democratizing around the world look to the U.S. as one of their sources for inspiration. But I think we should be familiar with the idea here in the land of the free and the home of the brave that what is right is not always popular and what is popular is not always right. If the CDC has to enact guidance and rules flying in the face of what idiots think is popular, then by all means do so. Because not everybody lives in a place like Newton. Lastly, as a preview of what's coming and why I'm still paranoid, despite, being caught up on my shots and everything. Of course, it's nice not to lose money. Here's what we have to look forward to when the schools start back up. And all this honor system crap that leaders are looking for. At the core of our discussion today is this idea that the way you handle the pandemic in some way, shape, or form is dictated by what people you don't like are doing, and that's fundamentally wrong. It's fundamentally wrong to turn actually fighting the virus into a left-wing Democrat liberal thing. It is also fundamentally wrong to turn fighting the virus into a People's Republic of China thing. If someone we don't agree with, might be a rival to, might be an adversary to, comes up with a good idea, it is still a good idea regardless of who practices it. And we shouldn't dismiss it due to guilt by association. We shouldn't do that. It also, this whole idea of being so tribal that we will hate stuff automatically because the other guy does it, doesn't exist in the private sector, doesn't exist in the government, in international intelligence, governments and companies trying to spy on each other and steal each other's trade secrets or other stuff. This idea of blowing off a good idea because the other guy does it is not something that is very common outside of the 2020 pandemic. We are doing something stupid by kowtowing to this garbage. And I think the death count for the United States versus other developed countries can speak to that still further. Here's an incident that's already going on, and we're going to see this as the schools start back up because more mitigations have been relaxed. Excuse me. This whole obsession with we have the tools. Well, if you're from a place like Newton, perhaps. Here is a situation from Los Angeles. One sick kid in the third grade didn't use the honor system baseline. Now 7+ kids, one teacher infected in week 1 of classes so far. With exposures in at least 5 total classes, numerous kids now miss out on in-person school, which is so incredibly important, according to, so many people who are talking heads on C-SPAN, CNN, what have you. And an entire class is missing their teacher. Look what the root cause of this is, though. This is what I'm talking about with this becoming like a stupid plague. You get too close to the stupids, you might catch the disease they carry. And sometimes you have less choices than others to not get stuck next to the stupids. Sick kids, symptomatic in third grade class, didn't take the antigen test because the parent doesn't think COVID is a big deal. Infected, kid next to them, kid next to them, kid next to them, kid next to them, 4 kids sitting next to them and the teacher. Next contacts on the contact list, friend another class, sibling, and then some TBDs. The incubation period hasn't gotten to the point where you might see if there's anyone further down. This is one incident in the Los Angeles area. Multiply this by what's going to happen in collective settings when the schools start back up. It almost makes you sorry you had kids if you have kids. It almost makes you sorry you had kids. If you had kids, think about it for a second. You know, you have a bunch of people like, kids don't get sick. Yeah, well, what if the kid passes, brings it home from school, like so many other bugs that come home from school, passes it on to the parents? Oh, well, yeah, well, the parents, what if they're vaccinated and boosted? Yeah. How much money do these parents, especially if they're paying for childcare, how much money can these parents afford to lose? So all of this lost money from people being too stuck up to actually still want to fight the virus. Multiply that by everybody who's affected by missing work, extra expenses, hospital bills, etc. because of this crap. Do you seriously think that's not going to eventually put a drain on the economy and our productivity? I don't know about you, but China might be onto something. And since I don't believe in dismissing good ideas just because people I may not like are doing them, I will say that, yeah, maybe China is playing the long game despite their own economic troubles over there. Maybe they figured this out, that a midterm election in November 2022 shouldn't be the reason why your economy takes a hit with lost productivity, lost wages, and all the snowbally stuff like that. One thing leads to another. This whole mess in this set of classes, this wave of infections, is just one incident caused by a single parent who has bad ideas and acts on them. How far do the effects go? And this is an early start school system, so to speak. How far do the effects go? How far do the delusions go? You should not make your decisions on what you're going to do regarding COVID based on what people you don't like are doing. And I suppose the last thing we should talk about is this. But Jay, aren't you technically doing that by staying home a lot? Because you know that people out there don't care and they're going to get people sick and get each other sick? I suppose so. But let's look at when these versions of this started happening. My whole idea that once I started seeing in 2020 that people are going to do the wrong thing when it comes to this, with all the disinformation and crap, that's when I was like, nope, let the stupids get themselves sick. In 2020, and I don't care how stuck up I sound by saying that, you have a bunch of people out there that are spoiled babies. They just don't care whose lives they ruin or even end. Coming up on the 1-year anniversary of my cousin's passing from Delta and seeing this going on. Someone fly Dr. Jha and Dr. Walensky down to the cemetery where my cousin is buried in Florida. Give them both a chance to piss on his grave. You know, we've seen from what happened with my cousin just what bad ideas, bad culture, as it was in the state of Florida during Delta with DeSantis and everything. See what happens when bad ideas go beyond people's heads and they start affecting real life and reality. And we'll see it again. So, but what are the outcomes of all of this? If I stay home because I know people are going to be dumb about this and get themselves and each other sick, and I either don't get this thing or I get it less than lots of other people, and try to avoid the intermediate and long-term effects that we're just now finding out about, because let's rewind the clock back to 2020. The original name for what we now call COVID was the novel coronavirus. That's what the news coverage in 2020 was calling it. What made it novel was something new. We didn't know what to do about it yet. We didn't know what it was going to do to people. That's still a good rule of thumb. You don't know who has it. You don't know what it's going to do to you if you get it. It's that variable and that stealthy. So we have been flying by the edge of our seat, becoming familiar with what this thing can do, what it can mutate into, how long the vaccines we developed for the ancestral strain remained relatively effective, etc. That's the way science works. Science is not where you go when you want always true all the time dogmatic truths like you see in religion and philosophy and anything else that's based on ideas first before experience. Science is where you go when you want to see what we're coming up with based on our curiosity about how the world works and how we can make our lives better when we understand how the world works. The development of what we've been through with this whole pandemic has been science in action from the start. But you're not going to find always true, forever, dogmatic truths like some kind of religion here. Things have to earn their legitimacy. Things have to be tested, and hypotheses need to turn into conclusions from experiments and data. And I can honestly say, though, as much as I'm upset about the divergence into three groups of people now, science and medicine, politicians and politics, and then charlatans and wacko stuff, as much as I can be upset about that, I really shouldn't. Because the divergence between politics and science was going on in 2021 as well. When President Biden did that speech where he said, if you're vaccinated, you're safe. And when certain people politically influenced were saying that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to worry, you will not, you won't catch it or spread it. But hey, you can always compare the Northeast numbers to Florida's numbers to see what difference our vaccination technology has made. And that's what I'm looking forward to the most. We want to get away from the rather negative sounding premise of this discussion. Let's look to the future and what's coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm very curious as to how things are going to work with the bivalent vaccines that are specifically being designed to target BA.5. What am I doing playing with this cleaning putty? Hold on. It's not Play-Doh or Silly Putty or anything. I know Silly Putty trended on making the thing fart and everything. I know it trended on Twitter earlier, but come on now. What's that weird smell with this stuff anyways? I don't know. Anyways, I've been using it since it was an as seen on TV product. Let's look to the future, as in the next couple of weeks, and end on a positive note here. The bivalent vaccines that are coming out, whether series or boosters, looking forward to the Moderna one, of course. Done all Moderna throughout all of this. Got my ass kicked by Moderna arm, but when all the stuff about the Pfizer shot started showing up and whatnot, and it turned into kind of like a second fiddle type thing. Yeah. Anyways. United States regulators required the bivalent boosters to target BA.5 specifically, the big one right now, and I see no clear successor to it. So I don't know if I'll be doing one of these again, but I said that in February too, so we'll see what happens. The BA.5, as far as variants go, was the last big one that I kind of got the impression that I should really be super concerned about and be super paranoid about. And it has led to me wearing masks at work during all these heat waves we've had during this drought-ridden summer that we've had here in Connecticut. A little inconvenience versus potentially missing weeks of work and losing paychecks. I'll take the mask. Thank you very much. It should be a no-brainer, but for so many people, it's not. For so many people, they're too stuck up and narcissistic to just have a little common sense and take every precaution they can in order to not get this thing. However, the bivalent booster, when it comes out, the American one will require it to target BA.5 specifically. So, in a couple of weeks, the United States will have once again the most up-to-date vaccines in the world. We required these companies to target BA.5 specifically, not just an Omicron thing. We homed in on the latest, greatest, biggest variants. Soon, America will have the most up-to-date shots in the entire world. Once again, we will be the envy of the world. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if there was vaccine tourism. People flying in from other countries to get American shots when ours are the newest again. And once again, American medical technology, of course, technically German as well with Pfizer-BioNTech. But once again, the West will be the envy of the world here. Now, once again, people are going to have nice things to say about us and our attempts to fight this thing. So I look forward to that. And then we'll see where things are from there. I mean, the vaccines we have were primarily targeted at the original strain from 2020. It'll be very interesting to see how things go once the bivalent vaccines make their way into the wild. But it'll be good to finally have the U.S. on top once again. And we'll see how things go with this round. Because quite frankly, let's not forget, COVID-19 is a threat to our way of life. It's a threat to everything we consider normal. As far as I'm concerned, it is a microscopic enemy that needs to be fought. If I don't get back to making another one of these things anytime soon, watch for the attitude to change after the election in the United States. When a midterm election is no longer interfering with what things are, with what policies and guidance and other stuff is coming out of Washington. I just hope that by the time some people come to their senses about COVID not being over, that it hasn't gotten too bad by then. But in all of this, we find that the enemy of my enemy is no way to respond to something like this. And I'll just leave it at that. 420 at the Geek House. I got other things to do. I got other things to talk about, other things to stream about, and other videos to make. But it's good to get this rant done first. We'll knock this out of the #1 parking spot soon enough. But yeah. Stay paranoid at least till the end of BA.5. Take a look at whatever bivalent booster options become available in your neck of the woods, because I certainly will. Because I see so many people out there deciding to be stupid. At some point, this has to pay off. Sure, yeah, the Northeast caught a break from BA.5 versus lots of the rest of the country because we had BA.2.12.1 making the rounds earlier and BA.2. But when the people that are being lulled to sleep are back on the menu for the virus with some other variant later on, then what? When things get colder, then what? When politics gets in the way of accessibility of, we have the tools, then what? I would love to stop doing these someday. But if there's anything I can take away from all of this, it is that there's enough stupidity out there for that to consistently fail to be the case. I don't even see another killer variant on the horizon at this point. You have Centaurus, BA.2.7.5, and BA.4.6. I don't really see another Omicron or a Delta or a BA.5 on the horizon right now. But hey, maybe I'll do another one of these things in a couple of months anyways, because of something else really stupid that happened. And that's all I have to say to that. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by, and stay vigilant.